Hello everybody and welcome to Tonga. Welcome to my new home. It's definitely not a bad view. So like I said, we are in Tonga at the moment, and I'm going to try and do this shot in as least possible shots as possible. Maybe we can make it all the way through without me making too many embarrassing mistakes, because I don't have all of my fancy editing software with me. Not that I can edit that well anyway, but hopefully the dogs don't interrupt us too much, and the chickens that you maybe see in the background don't distract you too much. So we're going to talk about are there any countries without coronavirus. So today is the 6th of May, and as of the 30th of April, that was the last update according to Wikipedia. As of the 30th of April, there are countries without coronavirus. In fact, there are 13 of them, and Tonga is one of them. So Tonga is one of the countries without coronavirus, and that's where I have ended up somehow. So how did this view come to be my back garden? It's a little bit of a long story. It may take me 5 or 10 minutes to explain, so feel free to fast forward, because in a little bit we're going to talk about the countries without coronavirus and a little bit about how they got to escape and get out of this pandemic, how there are still countries without coronavirus. And yeah, we'll have a talk about those, and I'll let you know the 13 of the countries without coronavirus at the moment, so without COVID-19. So feel free to skip to that, because I'm just going to talk about myself for the next 5 or 10 minutes and basically explain how this happened, because there are a few things along the way, including being locked out of the country that I live in and a cyclone hitting. So that's what we've got in store for the next 5 minutes. So okay, my story starts way back. So usually I live in China. And in January, I left China for a 2-week language course in Seoul to study Korean. So I left there on, I think it was the 16th of January. And things were pretty chilled in Beijing at that time. So I remember one of my Japanese friends, I was having dinner with them, and they were explaining, why is no one wearing masks here? Actually, they usually live in Hong Kong. I said, why is no one wearing masks here? And I was like, well, I mean, some people wear masks, yeah. And he was like, no, what about the coronavirus? And I was like, what's coronavirus? He was like, it's this big thing. I was like, okay, whatever. So that was on the 5th of January, or maybe a little bit later. So it still hadn't hit China media big yet. We weren't really aware of what was going on, what was happening. So when I left for South Korea, which was I think on the 16th of January, coronavirus was definitely in our vocabulary by then. And it was getting a little bit like, oh, what is this? What a great time to get out of China and go to South Korea. So I was in South Korea for 2 weeks, and during that 2 weeks, it was kind of mental. I was watching the numbers go into the hundreds and thousands in Beijing alone, just during those 2 weeks. So I decided, hey, why not? I'm gonna spend another week in South Korea. May as well let things calm down for a week, see if it gets a little bit better, and then I'll head back to Beijing. My company said that I could work remote during that time. I'd been working remotely for the past 2 weeks anyway, as I'd been doing the language course, so it wasn't really a big problem. After my extra week, so this is then 3 weeks in South Korea, I was getting to about mid-February, start of February. It looked like things were getting even more crazy. So I had a holiday planned to Fiji at the end of March, and I thought, hey, why not take it off now? I'm not so busy at work. It's a great opportunity to take some time off and get out of Asia and the surrounding countries of China. So I left for Fiji, which is random in itself, a country that I'd been meaning to go to for years. Has anyone seen The Truman Show? He mentions it on there. Anyway, so been wanting to go for Fiji for years. Went to Fiji on, I think it must have been the 10th of February. and then actually did a lot of travel around the South Pacific. So from Fiji, spent a bit of time in Fiji, then went to Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. I think that's it. Maybe I'm missing a country. Anyway, you may think I'm crazy. Like, I was traveling in February and March. Like, what? The way that I can justify my travels during this time is that the South Pacific had no cases of the virus. So travel was still going on. It was all still happening. It was all still fine. So I wasn't so worried. I didn't feel bad about, potentially spreading the virus. Everything was happening as normal. The only very big difference was I was getting a lot harder to get into these countries, into these South Pacific countries, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's probably one of the factors contributing as to why many of the South Pacific countries became countries without coronavirus, countries without COVID-19. So I was traveling Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, absolutely incredible, beautiful places. And then I got back to Fiji, and it looked like the world was kind of going a little bit crazy. And during this time, I was meant to go back to China several times, actually. I had flights booked, and then things happened along the way. So the first thing that happened was if I went back to China, if I went back to Beijing, I would have to quarantine for 14 days. I thought, hey, that sucks. Quarantine wasn't really in our vocabulary back then. Like, it was just like, I was like, no, I don't want to quarantine. Dumb thinking, I know. So I extended the holiday a little bit more, working remotely this whole time. And then it got to the point where it was, you have to quarantine, but in a quarantine government facility, and you have to fund it yourself. So not only would I have to, if I go back to Beijing, not only would I have to quarantine, but I can't even do it at my own house. I thought, hey, that sucks even more. So I extended the remote working in the Pacific a little bit longer. Probably some interesting decisions made on my half during that time. But so that takes me to basically the 19th of March. And at this time, I'd done a little bit of travels, but to be honest, I was still working and the world was kind of going a little bit mental. So I was like, okay, I will base up in Fiji for a little bit, for a few weeks, and see if things ease up in China. That was the way that it was looking, to be honest. Actually, China had got it under control, and they'd peaked and they were going down. So my thinking was, okay, hey, in a couple of weeks, I'll probably be able to go back to China and even maybe not do the quarantine. What happened at this point was quite a bit of a turning point. So as I was saying, so this was on around the 17th, 18th of March. And up until then, I had experienced China without coronavirus, China with coronavirus, peaking and then controlling it and then gradually getting down. And just as China was getting down, that's when the whole world started to kind of increase and stuff. And I was watching the UK, which I mean, it's awful what's happening there at the moment with the spread of the virus. But China was going down, and then the UK started to go up. And it felt like I was experiencing everything twice. And you guys have probably had a little bit of difficulty with social media and the news at the moment. It's just been awful, and everything was really getting to me because it was feeling like I was going through everything twice, So I wanted to get away for a weekend, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna base up in Fiji, had all my stuff, had a place to stay, had a big suitcase of my winter clothes that I'd taken from South Korea. It was -15 when I left South Korea to the South Pacific, and it's like 20-30 degrees now. It's going into winter though, so might need those winter clothes back. What was I saying? During this time, it was very difficult for me, and I just felt like I needed a weekend away from everything. I turned my phone off. I told my colleagues and my friends, listen, I'm not going to be online. I told one friend my address of where I was staying. And then I packed a little bag, left my big suitcase behind, packed a little bag, a weekend bag, and caught a flight to Tonga to have a little bit of a detox. And now that's where things really changed. So on the 19th of March, I came to Tonga for a 3-night trip. And it's currently the 6th of May and I have not been able to leave Tonga. How did that happen? I'm gonna go through everything very, very quickly because I think I've spoken a little bit too much about myself. So I arrive on the 19th of March and in the afternoon, Fiji declares its first case. And from then on, everything kind of changed. I knew that it would get kind of crazy at that point. So actually, I tried to leave Tonga the next day and tried to get a flight to New Zealand. Got to the airport and no, only New Zealand nationals are allowed to board. So there was a flight back to Fiji the next day on the 21st. So I went to the airport before this to check that I could board that flight. They said yes, so I bought the flight, went back to the hostel that I was staying in, got all my stuff, went back to the airport, and in that 2 hours, it became impossible to board that flight. It was only for Fiji nationals. And this, on the 21st of March, was the last international commercial flight out of Tonga. So it became very clear that I was here for a long time then. There were actually maybe about 20 or 30 foreigners stranded in the same situation as me. A lot of them in much worse situations. You know, they have family waiting for them in different countries, stuff like that. I'm quite happy to just bob along wherever I am, really. So by the 24th, I'd found a solid place to live. It was a very cute house just down the road from here now, actually, still overlooking the sea. And there was 3 other foreigners there as well. So it was a really nice place to live, and I'd got over everything. You know, I knew that I'd be stuck here. I'd left all of my stuff in Fiji, whatever. There's nothing I can do at this point. And then the next big news I heard was that it must have been like a week after I'd been here. The next big news I heard was that China had stopped foreigners completely from entering the country. So China was on complete close and lockdown. So I was kind of double stranded, stuck in Tonga and stuck out of the country that I live in. Whatever. There was enough crazy things that were happening this year, so it didn't really bother me. I knew I wasn't getting out here for a while anyway. And then it all gets a bit weird. So on the 29th of March, Tonga goes into lockdown, and which was fine. So it was meant to be a 1-week lockdown. I completely understand why they did it. I'm very glad that they did it. A 1-week lockdown. So you could only go out for essential shopping. Luckily, the place that I was staying at, they lent us all their car, so we would all go shopping together and get essential things like once a week. So we went on a big, like, what's it called, quarantine supermarket shop, but tons of things from the Costco here, not Costco. And yeah, just really stocked up. Not so much panic buying. There was no one really buying toilet paper and stuff, just stocking up in case we couldn't get to the shops for a while. The lockdown then went on until the 12th. This was 1 week longer than it was supposed to be. To give you an idea of what the lockdown looked like in Tonga, nothing was open. So the streets were completely deserted. There was no one really around. The town's not that big anyway, but everything was closed. So there's not really much to say about it apart from everything was closed, apart from the really big shops. You weren't allowed to move from village to village unless it was essential. For example, going like essential shopping once a week. And they actually had roadblocks in the road. Maybe I can show you some pictures or videos I have of it. But we would get stopped maybe at least 6 or 7 times just driving into town, which is about a 35-minute drive, which is kind of crazy. But they were pretty strict on the lockdown, which is good again. So those checkpoints were held in between each village. On the 3rd to last day of the lockdown is when Cyclone Harold hit Tonga. So Cyclone Harold hit Vanuatu pretty badly, and it was a Category 5 cyclone. It was meant to hit Fiji at Category 4 and then come down to Tonga at Category 3. What happened was it actually went up to a Category 5 cyclone by the time it hit Tonga, and it combined with the with the king tide, which is the biggest tide of the year. So as I mentioned, I was staying in a place just overlooking this sea here, and this was probably one of the most difficult experiences I've ever been through. I'm still like looking back and thinking that was really mental, but basically the cyclone hit us with massive tidal waves. Really, we could see waves out to sea that were about 2 or 3 times the size of the house. So the house that I was in was a 2-story house, and I was woken up at around 4 or 5 a.m. to some really crazy winds. Now, to be honest, I love storms and stuff like that, so I was pretty excited, went out on the balcony to see it all. I was in a 2-story house, which is important for the next part of the story, because basically I took a picture, I might put it on this video, I took a picture of me going outside onto the balcony to see the storm, and about 20 minutes after that, a massive wave comes crashing through the house, wipes out all of the downstairs, wipes out the house in front of us. There were 3 houses in front of us. They're completely wiped out. I actually saw one house being thrown like across in a wave. I've got a video of that too. I might try and put it in here. Yeah, and the downstairs was completely flooded. The cooker was moved on top of the stairs. Everything was mental and gone. I could talk about that for, another 30 minutes, whatever. So I'm not going to, but basically that sucked. My house was completely flooded. My purse and other things gone. I'm very glad that I had my laptop and my study books upstairs. I'm very thankful for a lot of things. I mean, there were 4 people in the house, and the people in the front 3 houses, they were evacuated already into where I was staying or into the owner's property. So no one got hurt, which is fine. It was just a really mental time. As luck would have it, I found a place the same day. This place where I'm staying actually needed a house sitter, so that's where I'm staying now, with 4 puppies and a dog and some random chickens that I sometimes see. And I am very, very aware of how lucky I am and how grateful and how things turned out. So that is me now on the 6th of May. And just to update you on more of Tonga, so after the cyclone, the lockdown was lifted on the 12th, but there was still a curfew until 8 p.m. for 1 week. And then the next week it was lifted to a 9 p.m. curfew. And then that brings us to this week, where the curfew is still in place, 9 p.m., but the bars and clubs are open. So I haven't had a chance to check those out yet because it was only lifted on Sunday. But we will see what a bar or club looks like at around 7 or 8 p.m. Later this week. And experience a little bit of that. But it is very strange to be in a country without coronavirus whilst the whole world is going through what they're going through. And believe me, it's not as if I've not been affected, and it's not as if Tonga has not been affected. Usually Tonga's big tourism would be happening around about now in June. There are many people that come over as tourists to see the whales. So lots of people, it's very much part of everybody's lives here. We're all very aware of it. It's affecting a lot of people. It's affecting a lot of us who are kind of stranded here. Some Europeans and other people managed to make it back. There's been a few flights direct back to the UK, but they go through LA, through the US, and I can't get a ESTA visa because I go to North Korea. And I can't get a US visa here. There was one flight back to Germany, a repatriation flight, which a lot of the foreigners took, but it didn't really make sense to me to get it back to Germany. I'd have to find my way back to the UK. And also, I don't really live in the UK. I don't have much of a life there. So I decided to stay here, somewhat self-stranded. So even in a country without COVID-19, it's still very much part of our lives. It's part of, it's affected many areas of life here, and you hear about it in the media all the time. And apart from that, it's still a big part of everyone's life here. There's no social distancing. There have been some signs up in shops that I've noticed, and when I first got here, there was hand sanitizer and stuff out like that, but all of that's gone now. It's officially a COVID-19 free country. So Tonga is one of the few countries without coronavirus, and I promised you that I would go over the full list of those 13 countries and talk a little bit about why they don't have the coronavirus, why there is still countries without COVID-19. So let's have a look at them. So in no particular order, the 13 countries are North Korea, Turkmenistan, Lesotho, Solomon Islands, Nauru, Tuvalu, Tonga, Vanuatu, Palau, Samoa, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. So how many is that? 10 out of those countries 10 out of those countries are all in the Pacific. They're all Pacific Island countries. 2 of those countries, you can have a look on Wikipedia. 2 of those countries are actually states on Wikipedia, not my words, and I'm not debating this, but 2 of those countries near the top of that list are suspected to have cases, but there is no data coming out of the countries. So let's say, out of those 13 countries, there may only be 11 or 10 countries that actually don't have the virus, but that's not up for debate today. Anyway, you can form your own opinions of that. So how did the Pacific cope so well? How are there still countries without the coronavirus? So if you skip to this part and you didn't listen to my story, fair enough, don't worry, I talked for a long time. The South Pacific and the Pacific Islands have been very, very strict since January. Since China first properly declared what was going on, the South Pacific began lockdown procedures, or began making it a lot more difficult to visit the countries. For example, every Pacific Island country that I can think of, I visited Vanuatu and Solomon Islands, and to visit both of those, you needed a certificate of health. Some were even more strict. For example, if you were on a plane with someone who then had to be quarantined or go off and get checked for corona, then everyone had to be. It was just very, very strict right from the beginning, which is a great way of handling it. The Pacific Islands are obviously far off countries, far away from everything, and they don't get that much tourism, I guess, in comparison to big cities and stuff like that. They're also more expensive to visit. I can tell you that from staying here for a long time. So those factors, actually I wrote a blog on countries without coronavirus, countries without COVID-19. So I debate a little bit more about the factors that really come into play as to how there is still countries without coronavirus. But those are the main factors. It's just acting on things very quickly. And it also helps that they are obviously islands in the middle of nowhere. So that is what I'm gonna talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed the background of Tonga. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Tonga and hearing a little bit about life in a country without coronavirus. Like I said, 13 countries without coronavirus. Tonga is one of them, and I hope for the Tongan people that Tonga stays a country without COVID-19. We are still feeling the effects here. It's not all fun and games, trust me, especially when a massive cyclone takes all of the stuff out of your house and floods the place that you live in, but things could be a lot worse. So I hope you're staying safe, staying indoors, and I'll be thinking of you when I go swimming in the sea. Bye bye.